if we do that with such a big percentage of our revenue coming from the federal government, how do we make it up? That's why this is so important and tied to our lands. We sit on a resource in this state where those resources dwarf the benefit we get from the federal government. Here's why this is so important. When the federal government, when Idaho became a state, but yet the federal government did not turn over all of the land, they knew that that wasn't going to be, the state wouldn't see tax receipts, and so they said, we're going to offset that by giving you subsidies. So we've had subsidies through the, at that time, general government, now called the federal government, for things like education, for things like healthcare, and so on, transportation. So, okay, that might sound okay, but when you take that subsidy, you also take the strings attached that come with it. Therein lies the problem on the social side. We're not controlling those things because we're dependent on that coming through the federal chain. And once again, 40% plus of all those dollars is debt service because they're so far in debt. But back directly to your question, the answer is we replace that money, and it will not happen overnight. It takes time, but we replace that money by having wise access and wisely managing the resources within our borders. You know what? We have got a resource in Washington and Fayette County that is a game changer for this state. It's called natural gas. And the technology exists to harvest that. And by the way, if you're concerned about the term fracking, if you heard of that, don't need to. It's pure gas. So we have got a wealth of that resource, but we're not tapping into it. You probably have heard about the economy going on in North Dakota. They don't have a problem funding their roads. They don't have a problem funding their education system. They're in a surplus circumstance because they're tapping into the resources that they've got. And so the answer is we replace those federal dollars over time by wisely managing the resources that were God-given to this state. It's a good question. Yes?
How do you keep the EPA out of that?
The question is, how do you keep the EPA out? First of all, the state arm of the EPA is called the DEQ. DEQ reports into the executive branch. That's the governor's office. And there are some things that, depending on the circumstances, but I'm going to try to answer your question this way. You know, sometimes as state leaders, we should just be saying no. Okay? I mean, it's not complicated. The answer is just no. And a number of the things that are being driven through those offices, I think, are just going to require a no. Now, that's not everything, and is there going to be challenges? Absolutely. But you know what? Our control in that sense, our state, I want to be careful how I state this, but the citizens of Idaho being in control is worth fighting for. And if that means that we wind up in a legal battle, or if that means that we confront things and just say, you know what, we're not going to do that, then we got to do that. And there are certain things that fall under that EPA category that are just not in the best interest of Idahoans. It's not going to be changed by necessarily just asking for it. Sometimes we're going to have to drive that. Yes, sir?
My question has to do with transfer of federal land and ownership in the state of Idaho. I've spent time with former panhandle forest supervisor, not a mayor, her daughter, my daughter, for the soccer team, so we've got to turn this money up. So it's going to be a two-question thing. Two questions. One is, how do you propose that federal lands be transferred those are two questions.
Good question. So let me address it this way. There is a process, and it's largely a legal process for the potential transfer of those lands. And the best way for me to probably frame it in this environment without running into a tremendous amount of detail is check out the American Lands Council on the web. Just if you do a search on American Lands Council, that's probably the best way to explain the effort to take legal steps, not necessarily with the congressional approval, by the way, legal steps to get access to those lands. Okay, and by the way, there is a compact of states, Western states. Utah is on the front of this right now. That is wanting us to engage, wanting Idaho to engage with them in kind of a compact type of format in order to do that. So in essence to your first question, then the answer is it's a series of legal steps in conjunction with some of our Western state neighbors in exactly the same circumstances that we are, because, by the way, we're not the only one that realizes just how sad a shape things are with the federal government.
So does that mean we sue the federal government for ownership? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I suppose there could be a provision for that, but it's not in the form of a series of lawsuits. It's a series of legal steps that claim constitutional rights at statehood. And so that's probably the best way to explain that. Also take a look at the history of the state of Hawaii. Hawaii had success with that either 50s or 60s in that arena, and that's kind of the model that has been followed. So take a look at those two things, and hopefully that at least gives you a pathway there. In terms of some of the other things, I think your question is tied to what the gentleman talked to over here in terms of EPA. You know, sometimes I do think that it's rightful, if we've got the constitutional backing, I do think it's right for the states and leadership within the states to say, hey, you know what, this is not in the best interest here. And put that onus of the suit on the federal government. Do they want to come? Do they want to engage on that front? I can't give you a blanket statement that on carte blanche issues to say, yeah, we're just going to go file a series of lawsuits. That's not the answer. You've got to take those one step at a time. But the point is this. We need to point in a different direction. Right now, we're in the direction where the federal government says, we're going to just block access, period. What I'm saying is we've got to turn that ship this way and say, no, we're going to take steps where the state and the people of Idaho are in charge. Some cases, that's going to be legal steps where we're advancing the ball, if you will, with our neighbors. In other steps, there might be legal action. We'll take those one at a time. My point is, we want to move from this direction where we're forfeiting. And by the way, this is a lose-lose-lose direction. Here's an example. If you don't manage the timber, it gets disease, there's undergrowth, susceptible to fires, then, okay, then those assets going up in smoke, literally, it's bad for the environment, airshed, watershed, bad for the economy. Why not turn that around where you're wisely managing those forests, and it becomes a win-win-win, a win for the economy and the jobs here in the state, a win for the federal government, because, by the way, they get tax revenue off that too. Why wouldn't they want to engage with that? Number three, it's a win for the environment, because you're not nearly as susceptible to forest fires, airshed, watershed problems. And by the way, this may or may not include state ownership. Wise, balanced access. That's what we need. But good question. Yes.
I don't mean this rudely, but Otter seems to become kind of a rhino. How will I know that you're a real Republican, not someone that's going to say what they want to say to get elected? I mean that respectfully, though. I don't mean it rudely.
It's a great question, and I'll repeat it if you didn't hear it. It was basically how do you know that I'm not just saying what I'm trying to say to get elected and I won't change. I guess maybe the best way to respond to that is this. from a personal standpoint, nowhere on my personal life bucket list did it stay state senator. Nowhere on my life's personal bucket list does it say governor. Honestly, and I gotta be careful how I frame this, but I really don't care about my political future. And that empowers me, because if I were to lose, I have a life. I have a wife who loves me. I got kids who love me. I got small business that, you know, the world's gonna continue to rotate. I don't need this personally. When I decided to challenge our incumbent governor from the same party, in terms of politics, that's the equivalent of filing for divorce, okay? I'm done in the state senate. This is my last term. I am not running for that office. It's time to either make a change, appeal to the people of the state and say, look, I'm going to offer a different direction, and then it's up to you. The other response I would add to that is, if you know any of my colleagues on either side of the aisle who have been in the legislature or know me through that channel over the last 10 years, I would ask you to go talk to them, no matter who they are, and just say, okay, so you've been around this Fulcher guy. Does he do what he says he'll do? And will he stand up? And to a fault, I think they'll tell you, I at least stand up. They may not agree with me, and that's okay. But you know what? I'm not doing this for popularity, and I'm not doing this for the title. I'm doing it because I think it's a right thing for the state, and we're going. And I hope I answered your question. Yes, sir.
You consider yourself to be a constitutionalist, liberty, freedom. What is your understanding of the meaning of the Second Amendment?
What's my understanding of the meaning of the Second Amendment? Let me frame it this way. There has never been in the history of mankind a society who has forfeited that right where it's worked out well. Okay? We lose the right to bear arms. We do lose our freedom. And we do lose our, whether it's personal sovereignty, state sovereignty, whatever you want to call it. There is an undeniable connection there, and it goes much deeper than just how big is the clip in your pistol. I mean, this is fundamental. Their very being of me, in terms of any influence I've got, will be to uphold that and to potentially even advance that. I mean, we're in an environment where we have a government that is more interested in control than it is service, and that's not healthy, in my opinion, especially given the foundation of our republic. And there will be ongoing efforts to take control of those Second Amendment rights, because that leaves people more defenseless. We have to protect that with the fiber of our being. Yes, sir.
Could you discuss your position on Common Core? I still have some quandaries about exactly how it works.
Question, it was a position on Common Core, and Common Core is not a federal mandate. It is a federally backed education, curriculum, testing, data gathering mechanism. Let me tell you how that works and why there's a tie directly with the federal government. Although it's not mandated by the federal government, if you don't comply, you don't qualify for certain grants. Okay, so that's how that influence works in some cases. But here's what bothers me about it. Anytime we standardize a curriculum or we standardize testing with our students, then we do a couple of things. We're trying to put everybody into the same mold. We're trying to standardize students. We're trying to standardize outcomes. We're trying to standardize, and maybe with the best intent. I'm not going to argue that it's not with good intent. But I'm telling you, I think A, it doesn't work. B, I don't like it because I don't want to standardize my kids with the kids in Rhode Island. Nothing against Rhode Island or any other state or any other country for that matter. I want to stimulate their interest to innovate. I want to know the content of the history curriculum. I want to know the content of the sex education curriculum. I don't want somebody in another state or another city or outside of our own teachers and parents making those decisions. So I disagree with it for that reason. Last week, I printed a bill in the legislature that would mandate the State Department of Ed or the Department of the Board of Education cannot engage in a multi-state consortium like SBAC, that's the testing, or a common curriculum with the federal government without legislative approval, which all that means is the people that you elect to do what I'm doing right now, they have to say yes or no before they can do that. So that's what the bill says. The other thing about Common Core is anytime you create a standardized set of rules or curriculum and you drop that down on Idaho or Michigan or whatever, it's just different. There's not a whole lot of, well, I won't say not a whole lot. There's differences between Kootenai County and inner city Detroit, okay? And so the same curriculum and the same test standards just don't make sense.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes?
What are your thoughts on Idaho corporate and personal income tax?
Thoughts on Idaho corporate personal income tax. There's a direct correlation between burden and regulation and performance, between burden and regulation and incentive, between burden and regulation and economic growth. To the extent we can reduce that burden, that will have a correlation to the growth economically. By reducing the burden, by reducing those regulatory constraints, we empower industry. We empower our farms, our dairies, our economic, our technology incubators. You know what? This republic, which I do believe was divinely inspired, this republic has generated more wealth than all other societies in the history of the world combined. And the reason that it has is because it was done with the intent that there would be a high incentive. There's an incentive to go take a risk, that you achieve the fruits of your labor. You keep the majority of the fruits of your labor. And we are squelching that. And we are suffering the ramifications of squelching that. So I hope that answers the question. How about some counsel?
Yes. Well, sorry, it's just a question.
Okay.
I'm interested in your point of view on moral issues. A lot of what's happening legislatively seems to have a moral component, like Obamacare, mandating abortion, that sort of thing. But the bottom line is it's always a question of what's right and wrong. And I want to know what your point of view is on some of the major moral issues that we deal with.
Question is point of view on some of the major moral issues. First of all, I will tell you this. I think this election will be decided on the issues where the governor and I probably disagree more than where we agree. As far as I know, we agree on these types of things. But I'll just tell you flat out, I'm a staunch pro-life believer, and I have run pro-life legislation. One of the most objectionable components of the Affordable Care Act and the Obamacare exchange is because it mandates that there is mandatory abortifacient coverage. That's very objectionable to people like me. Even for companies or businesses who operate under a Christian flag or a Christian nature, they're mandated in carrying this on. I have mandatory maternity care coverage, which makes a whole heck of a lot of sense. And your wife has mandatory prostate coverage. That makes a heck of a lot of sense. So this is, you're covered. Now you do it.
You just have to have a test.
So, but back to the point is, there are just some things that I don't think most people realize when we invited that exchange in, and we did, we embraced it. We also invested in it at that time. we became invested in seeing it succeed. And not only that, but we became invested in enforcing it. That's wrong for those components and others. Yes?
How you doing money-wise?
Money-wise, when we announced on November 23rd that that we were, when I say we, I'm talking about my wife and I, but running for governor. And we also knew that this was going to take a commitment, and so my wife and I put in the first $100,000 to campaign. That's a big number for us, okay? And you know, we've done okay, but that's a big number for us. But we knew we had to make that commitment, A, because I wanted people to know I'm invested, okay? B, we knew that we're going to have to jumpstart this. We also knew that we would not win the money battle, okay? There's no way anybody's going to go up against a person who's been in office for 40 years with that kind of machine and win on the money. So we did that, and frankly, my goal by the end of the year, December 31, was to at least match that with contributions, just so that that was the first reporting period. And I wanted to at least be able to say, you know, we raised what I put in. And we raised an incremental 152,000 plus the 100 that I put in. So we finished December 31 at a little over $250,000. And you know, again, you know, we're going to be way behind on the money battle. And here's how I would frame that. And I'm going to segue with. Hope you don't mind, but I'll just say this, folks. If I could ask you for anything, if what I'm saying makes sense, and this is something that you believe is the right direction, the first thing I would say is, if I could ask for one thing, it'd be your prayers. Mm-hmm. Okay? I would rather have that than your money. Just because if this campaign isn't blessed, you know what? Then I'm not going to be successful in doing this anyway. Mm-hmm. So that's the first thing.
Amen.
If you're in a situation where your family obligations are covered and you can contribute to the campaign, please do. If you think what I'm saying makes sense, please do. And there'll be means to do that if you can, if you want to. All right. There's other ways to help, phone calls and that kind of thing. But we're hoping to get in excess of $500,000, and we have the raw infrastructure expenses of the campaign covered. It's just going to be a function of how much can we afford to spread the word. So that's the absolute detail for that question. So
That's good.
yes, sir.
Good answer.
I recently came into close association with one of the state representatives, and after reading what you had to say in the paper, I asked him, is this guy the real deal? And he said, yes, he is. And I love everything I've heard from you today. As we have seen on the national level, the president wants to do things, but if he doesn't have Congress, he has a struggle. Of course, now he's doing things outside of the Constitution. If you get elected, I want you to be successful in all these endeavors that you're talking about. What do you need in place to do that?
That question is, if elected, what do I need in place to be successful? Because the president, on a national level, the president does not have the cooperation of Congress, and so there's kind of this. You know, I think I know personally just about every single legislator in the state. And there might be a few. There was a couple replacements over the last year, which I don't know well, and there's a few that I just haven't worked with well. But I think I know just about all of them. And here's my response to that. I believe, given the right direction, given the right vision, I believe that the four things that I'm talking about can get traction with the majority of the legislators in the state of Idaho. The problem is right now it's not being driven. Okay. Of those 4 points that I talked about, I think there's a polar disagreement with the current governor on two of them. One of them is the healthcare, and the other one is on the education. But I think we're probably in sync on the other two, the federal lands and the, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, so I'm giving you a perspective, but I think that generally speaking, would be the same philosophical mindset on the federal lands and on the loosening that fiscal tether with DC. The difference is it's not currently being driven. Somebody really does have to take the lead. And I'm not being critical of any of my colleagues, for that matter myself. We're part-time legislators. We have jobs, we're retired, or we have jobs, or we're there 3 months out of the year. And some of these things I'm talking about, these are major undertakings, and they will take years. But it's taking the ship and taking it from this direction and pointing it that direction. And I believe that the people of this state generally agree with what I'm saying. And I believe that the legislators in this state generally agree with what I'm saying. And I believe that properly led, properly driven, properly encouraged, and I don't mean that in a hammer sort of way, I mean it truly with the facts. I believe we have the majority of this legislature, the leaders in the state, to get cooperation to do those kind of things. It may take some time, and it may not happen all at once, but I think that people realize the need to change course. But thank you for that. Yes, sir.
Kind of in that same line, I went to the town hall meeting over at the college that you were at.
Yeah, and I see.
A month ago.
Yeah, yeah.
And one of the guys there, senators or representatives, kind of made an eye-opening comment about when they are in session, when you're in session, it just seems like all you're doing is struggling with the budget, and really forward-thinking stuff gets passed aside because there are all these tackling issues with money. I don't know, as a governor, can you push them topics of forward thinking more in the forefront and say maybe give the budget to the accountants?
Yeah. If you didn't hear that, can I repeat or try to paraphrase that? Go
Sure.
This direction. Very good question, by the way. But the question was, sometimes the legislature seems to get so hung up in trying to just manage the budget, we're not doing forward-looking things. And frankly, I fall into that trap right now. Yes, I believe that to be true, and I think it's a function of what I just said before. I think it's a good thing that we have a part-time legislature in the state. If not, we'd have 105 bureaucrats with staff and all that expense politics. But one of the downsides is when you're there for a short period of time, it's difficult to coordinate a long-term strategy, a vision. And that's what I'm trying to do potentially in a different role. I see that. I see that as a problem, and it's nobody's fault specifically, talking legislatively. I don't want to put words in my opponent's mouth, and so I'm going to be careful how I say this, but I'll put it this way. The things that I was telling you about is the vision that I believe that we need to subscribe to, but in order to achieve that, you have to take concrete steps. It has to be planned out, it's got to be lobbied, it's got to be sold to your colleagues in the legislature, it's got to be validated by the people who put us in office. I mean, let's face it, I mean, if this message doesn't resonate with 51% of the voters, we're not going to do it. And that's because that's not the path we're on. It does take planning, it does take leadership, it does take a lot of effort to go this way. And it's just because of the system. It's difficult to drive that strictly legislatively. And you're right, the budget is first and foremost challenge for the legislature. We fight over your money for 3 months. And really it's amazing when you think about, if you look at the state budget as a pizza pie, 65% of that pizza pie, of all the incoming revenue to the state, at the state level, goes back out to education. 53% K-12, 12% higher ed. About 20% goes to health and welfare. By the way, that piece is growing. Okay? And about 10% goes to public safety, corrections, police, fire. There's 95%. So we're really just fighting over 5%, really. I mean, that's how that works. But anyway, it's got to be driven. And I think that pretty much, that long-term strategy has to be set pretty much out of the executive branch, realistically, to make it work.
Is there any taxes that you would be willing to repeal or want to have repealed?
Is there any tax I'd be really willing to repeal or what to have repealed?
I heard something about the grocery, there was a grocery tax
Right.
or something.
Yeah, I actually have proposed a bill to repeal the tax on groceries at the till. And I'll give you a quick backdrop to that. 2006, Governor Risch was governor, and under his leadership, the state added a penny sales tax and took the levy off the maintenance and operations of property tax. And it was a significant change in how government was funded. And at that time, myself and at that Representative Bayer, who's now Senator Bayer, said, wait a minute, if we're going to raise sales tax, then that's the most regressive tax there is. We should take the tax off of food. Well, that was, if memory serves correctly, that's like $120 million a year type thing. So what we did is we put in we ran legislation. It took us a while. This is one of those big deals. It took us a while. In 2008, I think it was, we finally passed it. It was a staged grocery tax credit, so that when you file your taxes, you get a percentage back. And it was to be implemented over the course of 6 years. And that was how we sold the idea of removing the tax on food. Governor vetoed it. Governor Otter vetoed it, 2008. So Representative Bayer and I ran it again in 2009, and I think we got a supermajority, and Governor signed it. Here's the problem with what's happened with that. Since it's a credit, there's this bucket of money sitting there every year, and when we go fight over the budget, guess what? Everybody wants to reach into that cookie jar. And so we're defending that tax credit on food every year. So this year, we said, Senator Bayer and I went back to the drawing board and said, okay, we need to just take the tax off the till. And just be done with it. That way it's not collected in the first place. Removes the temptation to go steal it for other things. So that's one. I would support removing other taxes as well. I mean, those things need to be handled as we can, but it's back to the point over here. If we reduce that burden, we're gonna see the benefit over time with economic development. Yes.
There are some among us, I think, who would argue that the sorry state of the country is due to Congress ignoring the Constitution. That not only Congress, but the executive branch, the judicial as well. And that's why we're in. We're spending stuff on stuff that's not constitutional. We're fighting wars that are not constitutional. And there are those who are arguing that the country is in the state we're in because the Constitution's not working. And we really should do something about the Constitution. In fact, maybe we should get together, get all those states together, and sit down and make amendments, like Mark Levin talks about. What's your attitude about constitutional amendments?
That's a great question, and it's a big topic. I can tell you it's a big topic in the legislature, and I've got close friends on both sides of the issue on this. And the Levin book, the Liberty, I forget the title, Liberty Amendments, he makes a compelling case. I don't support it, and I'll tell you why. There's no solid provision that can limit what happens to other sections of the Constitution once you open it up. And that scares me. It just frightens me. It's a pretty darn good document. The problem is we're just not following it. And from my perspective, the effort should be more on following the constitutional law instead of skirting it, and instead of trying to go in and change it. So I say that in all due respect, because like I say, I've got close friends on both sides of this issue. I understand the argument that says, hey, look, we're not gonna have a balanced budget as long as Congress is making the decisions, so the states have to do it. I understand that's a compelling argument. It just scares the living heck out of me. What happens if we open that thing up, and what else can be changed?
How impact isn't there a bill before the legislature now that calls for the calling of a?
Yes. I voted against it at the time. It is, it will be before Senate State Affairs, which is a committee that I sit on, within the next couple of weeks. Yes, sir.
Well, you said you wanted some counsel, so here we go. You said you grew up in Meridian as a farm kid, but Crestline Farm there.
Right.
I was the same thing. I grew up in farm country, and you can't find a farm in the county where I grew up in. You know, it always seems that people who are running for office try to sell people on growth all the time.
Yeah.
Growth's a two-edged sword. The place that I grew up is unrecognizable to me. I wouldn't move back there if someone offered me $1 million, because it's a mess. It's a mess of traffic that used to be a little town. And my advice to you, my counsel to you would be, as governor, please keep the rural people in mind who live in a place that they love and don't really want to see it change a great deal. Most of the power seems to be centered in the cities because they have high population. They end up telling a lot of people what to do. That's happened here in Cook County as well. There are people who are fighting back against that. But I would just counsel you to please remember that all growth and all change is not necessarily positive.
I'll take that advice, counsel. So thank you for that. And
I'm relatively new to the state of Idaho from the socialist state of California. And,
Willing to admit it.
you know, the massive social welfare state that was created there is now majority rule in the state of California. And it's coming to a city near you. It's nationwide. And when you think about Obama, and you know, I see him doing this massive social welfare, creating this country as a massive social welfare state, and it's going to be majority rule because they're outnumbering those who contribute to society. And this Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, Utah, this geographic area is the last remnants of free America that I see left, and that's why we came here. And what he said is correct. We need to keep it that way. We need to make it stay that way. I don't know what you can do as a governor to prevent it from, the flood from coming in, but.
you know what? Thank you, and it's a good point. Let me just share my 2 cents on that. If Idaho, the things that I'm talking about, I do not believe are going to be driven out of Washington, D.C. I think they're very important, but they're not going to be driven out of Washington, D.C., which means they're going to be driven out of the states, or they're not going to be driven at all. And most states do not have the appetite to do what I'm talking about doing, which is kind of backing things up in the sense that you put novel idea of having people in control again, you know? It's not going to happen in California. That demographic is so different. And I'm not criticizing. All I'm saying is I just objectively don't see that happening there. I don't see that happening in Massachusetts. I don't see that happening in New York. But it can happen here. And if we have success in doing what we're talking about, and I appreciate the comments from the gentleman in the back on just how difficult this access to lands may be. But imagine for a moment if we start making traction on that. That emboldens Utah. That emboldens Wyoming. That emboldens Arkansas. That emboldens Montana. And I know, because I've worked with those guys, we can be a national leader on this front. And some of this really is doable, okay? I mean, the direction change is doable, but it's got to be driven. And I understand what you're saying, and I think I understand why you live in Idaho now. I came home to Idaho. I never formally lived anywhere else, but I spent 24 years of my life in other states and other countries working, commuting, but in and out a lot. This is worth fighting for here, man. And you know what? The single biggest decision or factor in me making this decision when I had that heart-to-heart with my wife was saying, you know what, dear? I'm one of a handful of guys or gals in this state who has the chance of realistically pulling this off. Because, I mean, let's face it, there's a certain resume you just kind of need, unless you're Arnold Schwarzenegger and you got, you know, endless name ID and endless money and all that kind of thing. But for the most part, in the state of Idaho, you need to have a deep root component on your resume. You got to have some business and ag under your belt. You got to have an education under your belt. You got to have some legislative experience. I got all that stuff. I know that I'm one of just a handful of people who realistically can pull this off. I don't want to wake up in 3 years or 5 years and look in the mirror when this is all implemented and say, you know what, you were a coward. You had a chance to do something about this, and you didn't even try. You know what? I'm trying. I believe in what I'm saying. I believe in the direction that we're going. And I believe the majority of Idahoans agree with that. I'm going to do my best to go there, and because it's worth fighting for. Enough said. Yes.
I was just going to make a suggestion and kind of a question. How are you doing on social media? I know you have Facebook and a webpage. Do you do any of the other ones? And are you going to do any, are you promoting yourself online? I think when you get to the under 40 graphic, if you want them to vote, that's an important way to get out the message.
Excellent point. It was about social media and our efforts there. I think we've got a reasonably good effort on the social media front. But one thing that sometimes I take for granted is, and frankly, I have to figure a way around. Social media does this, but in terms of other media channels, you don't see the same media that the rest of the state sees. And so, like this grocery thing, I mean, that's been the grocery tax debate that I'm involved with. A lot of the other things I'm talking about, that's getting blasted around the state through other forms of media, but not here. And so, you don't see the things that the rest of the state sees that way. I got to get better at that, and we've got a nice group of people who's come around me to help on that front to figure out how to best reach out in this media market to communicate our message. And social media is one.
I would suggest to not do the papers as much. I think a lot of people don't trust them, and a lot of them are liberal, and you're only going to reach a certain demographic that way. I wouldn't put all your money in that basket.
Okay, thank you for that, Council.
If you talk to Steve, think about chuckling.
Yeah. So, yeah, thank you for that. Yes, sir.
I want to make a statement, then a question. The statement says, I didn't know Russ Fulcher, so I thought I'd ask one of his colleagues, and I know a number of other senators, but I asked John Getty, who served with Russ for a long time. What I wanted to share was I said, well, what's Russ like? He said he's a straight shooter, he's honest, his word is good, he's a Christian man. So I thought I'd share that from one of your colleagues. But my question goes to this, is I did an analysis a couple of years ago, and I took the 44 counties in Idaho and compared the urban renewal increment value as in each city that has an urban renewal agency and compared it to their tax base. The city that we're in right now, Post Falls, has one of the highest. By the way, Cooney County has more increment value than Ada County. And Ada County is a lot larger county. And what that means is increment value means all that money goes to the urban renewal district, not to the schools, to the NIC, or the highway district, but it goes to the developers that get that money. So Post Falls at that time, when I did the analysis, had 22% of their total tax base in increment values. So my question is this, would you support legislation, in the Idaho legislature, that would say that we give property owners that are within the urban renewal district an option, whether they want their money to go to the school district, to the highway district, to go to the urban renewal district because it's taxation without representation. By giving them a say,
Yeah.
then let the property owner decide, giving it back to your theme of giving the power back to the people.
Yeah, the answer is that it's gotta be yes. I think that goes hand in hand with the overall need to reform the whole urban renewal set of statutes. And I am aware of the challenges here, and this is not the only one. There's urban renewal, I would say abuse in 3 or 4 significant demographics in the state. Those boards need, and here's just some ideas, and you could probably give me some good counsel, but with what my knowledge base is currently, would make sense to me if those boards were elected and they were short terms. So those urban renewal taxing districts had a short lifespan and they were operated by elected people. This whole shoestring thing too has been really abused, reaching out and just taking certain nuggets of the tax base. There is a taxation without representation problem there, as there is with forced annexation. Both of those need to be addressed and reformed. I don't pretend to be an expert, but I know it's a problem, and that's one of those areas where, one other thing is, there is not a good definition of blight, okay? And so, local governments have the ability, I believe, incorrectly, to use eminent domain to claim properties because they're blighted, but there's not a good definition. What does that mean? That's problematic. Very, very good comment and good counsel, by the way. Thank you for that. Yes, sir.
There are 11 states that don't have an income tax. About 3 years ago, I did a little bit of research on my own and found out that 10 of those 11 states have stronger economies than the other 50. The 11th one is the state of Washington, and we don't understand why. They're not one of the stronger economies. And so I'm wondering if there's been some thought on your part about that, some discussion in your circle.
On income tax specifically?
Well, and the fact that the 10 of those 11 states that don't have that boast a stronger economy than those that do.
I was not aware of that.
I'll send you the study.
No, I believe you. It's just interesting. I did not know that. And it would be also interesting to compare their overall tax burden compared to, say, Idaho. So if it's not coming off of income tax, where is it coming from? And can we learn something from that? I would like to see it.
Probably 3 or 4 years ago, I actually sent out a letter to everybody who was in the legislature at that time, and referred to the study.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. I did not know that. And
I think Washington State has a huge estate tax, so we don't have.
Washington State?
Yeah.
Big estate tax.
One quick thing. Like I said earlier, being from the Socialist state of California, illegal immigration has absolutely destroyed the whole southern half of the state. I was a policeman down there for 31 years, and I saw it firsthand. It was devastating what's happened to that state. When I emerged from there, you know, it's no longer what it used to be. It used to be actually, like, hard to believe, but it used to be a good place to live. I see that spreading in the St. George, Utah. When I came up here, I saw the same things that were happening in Southern California there. I don't see it in the state of Idaho, but it's coming. It could definitely get this far, okay? And I married an El Salvadorian, so I have nothing against, you know, immigration. But what is your stance on illegal immigration, and what can we do to prevent that disease from coming into this area in 5 or 10 years from now?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and one I could use some counsel on too. Let me tell you where I'm at right now. If somebody wants to come into our country, somebody wants to come into our state, welcome. Now follow the law.
Yeah.
Just follow the doggone law.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, one of the reasons another reason that we took the approach of the grocery tax credit, we knew we had to step it in, but one of the reasons was that for some people, that's the only tax they pay, right? And so we didn't want to completely remove that at that stage, but that was one of the reasons why. It's just simply not fair to everybody to give some folks a pass on those services. I mean, if we all kick in a piece, you know what, we can cover the services that we need. And if we're doing the right thing to manage our environment, if we're doing the right things to encourage our economy, we've got the resources to do that, but it needs to be equally applied. And so for those who want to take advantage of that system, there are provisions for it. Now, here's where I could use the council. If those provisions in some circumstances are just too difficult or not difficult enough, let's sit down and let's figure that out and hash through that policy. But this is complicated by the federal government because they're picking and choosing what laws they want to enforce and what laws they don't. Okay?
Well, in the city of LA, they're actually giving driver's licenses, special driver's license to aliens.
Right. And I was lobbied, like I am every year, by a group that wants me to support state funding for non-residents at our colleges and universities, which I probably said no to.
That happened again.
But we have a set of laws. Let's follow those, okay? But in terms of the finer points, if there are certain things that aren't strict enough or too strict, then I'm open to having that debate. But this whole thing of just some not contributing is just simply not fair to the rest. Yes, sir.
It's a question I know you thought of, so I'm going to ask it. What's your plans to beat the Democrat in November with all of this money?
Here's my thought on that, and I don't know H.A. well. I've met him, I know him, we've interacted a little bit. I believe this race will be largely influenced on May 20.
Yep.
I take nothing for granted, but I believe that if we prevail on May 20th, given the circumstances on the national landscape, the current attitude of Idahoans as I understand it, and I'm getting a feel for it now, I think it's a difficult task to be a Democrat component with an Obama administration in the White House in the state of Idaho. Having said that, incredibly well financed. We win in May, that's going to open up a lot more support than I've got now, right? Because to a lot of people, I'm still proving myself. And to a lot of people, they're not going to want to buck the current system because in case I were to lose, they don't want to look bad or whatever. We're going to make that. I think we do prevail. At that time, the kind of deck gets reset, and we take on a new challenge because we've got someone with an entirely different message there, an entirely different set of circumstances, and I would look forward to having that debate. I would look forward to that challenge, and I think we prevail.
I just had a quick comment on some of the avenues on, it seems like all of these problems that the state are just trying to overcome the federal government and a lot of things like that. It seems like the states that are like-minded thinking, if we combine all their strengths, you know, that have the same objectives, then we can get things done easier.
Yeah, there's definitely some strength in numbers, and we've got some friends out there.
Texas has got a lot of places.
They do, and they've also done a lot of their own policy setting. They're a model for some of the things that I'm talking about. I mean, understanding in corresponding with colleagues there is they basically are refusing to implement the mandates off the Affordable Care Act. Just saying, sorry, doesn't fit Texas, not gonna do it. Okay, I get that.
Have forgiveness instead of.
You know, and remember this too, okay, in terms of the sovereignty argument in general, that's a constitutional provision that you shouldn't have to ask for, right? So maybe sometimes you just gotta take that. So, and I don't say that lightly, okay, because I am not an anti-federal government guy. I mean, just imagine the things they've got on their plate with international foreign policy stuff and the military challenges, dealing around with South Korea or North Korea. Holy cow, they have got their plates full. So let's just do them a favor. Let's take Idaho off that plate. We'll take care of this little piece. But I'm not an anti-federal guy. We need them. They need us. And I want to reset that pendulum a little bit and say, hey, look, guys, don't worry about managing our healthcare system. Don't worry about managing our education system. Now, if you give us the tools, you don't even have to subsidize. Just give us the tools. We'll take it.